or is it cold
Um,
there?
oh, it's kind of chilly, and I don't know what. I just have this, and so I put it on in the morning, and then I just lump around all day, and you know, yeah, it gives me that outdoorsy look.
Were
That's
you
how
in
I am.
Oregon still, Pete?
I'm sorry.
Where are you? Oregon still?
Oh no, I moved to Seattle.
Oh,
My
Okay.
I grew up here, but I lived in Portland for most of my adult life. But then
Right.
I came back here a few years ago.
Okay. All right. You are live, Ryan. I got you. So
But do you see it on Spring Nuts?
I don't see it on Spring Nuts. I see it
Oh,
on
there
your
it goes.
page.
Sorry,
Okay.
there was a glitch.
All right.
Okay, I shared
and you
it to
and you
Spring Nuts. Now I'm going to share it to the cafe, and then
right.
off we go. All right, we should be good.
You're good.
All right.
Let's see if
Well, Howie,
I'm
wait,
trying to see if
whenever
it's in.
you're
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if I see it in Spring Nuts. I don't see it there yet. Second.
Peter, I was asking Stan this before I asked you. I didn't want to ask you something if it was already out there. At the 2018 Darkness Symposium, you were the keynote speaker before they showed the Born to Run documentary, or the Darkness
Hmm.
documentary, sorry. You told this great story that you had written. Has that ever been published anywhere? Is that out there somewhere?
Which one? The
It basically was about how your friends had met Bruce before a show.
Oh
He asked them if
yeah.
they wanted to play, and they did, and you asked him about it. He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, he was asking, he asked for a request. He said, "Do you have any requests?" And my friend said, yeah, and like he said he had he said his they had been chatting earlier. They were backstage at a Foo Fighters show in Vancouver, which was right before because it was a night off on Bruce's tour in 2008. And so they chatted for a little while, and then at the end of the evening, Bruce saw him and came up to him and said, "Do you have any got any requests for tomorrow?" And my friend said the only Springsteen, I mean, he's a huge fan, but he was so taken aback. He said the only thing he could think to say was "None but the brave," and Bruce was like, "Tough. Okay, let me see what I can do." And he ended up, and that was the night they did the like they premiered it like a world premiere. And Bruce did that thing, where he like in the middle of the show or at some point he says, "Yeah, I met this guy," and he told this whole story about how he met this guy that I knew backstage or at this thing, and that he asked for a request, and the guy said this thing, and he said it's like we've never finished that song, we never even thought about playing it, but we're gonna play it tonight for that guy, and it was a whole huge deal, and the whole Springsteen verse was all crazy. It's like he played "None But the Brave," and then when I asked Bruce about it a few years later, he was like, "Nope, I don't remember that." And I was like taken aback because it was like that was kind of a thing. And then he said, "Well, that's what I do. I make miracles happen." And I thought, and I was like, "Oh, well, sure. That's like I didn't expect that. I didn't quite know what to say." But then, like a month or two later, I was talking to him again, and this was the whole curious thing. He goes, he just drew my attention back to that anecdote, and he goes, "Remember what I said last month about not remembering your friend when he requested None But the Brave?" And I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "I always remembered that." And it was kind of like what I there was like a lot of things that were interesting about that, and one of them was his impulse to kind of deny that he had any recollection of that whatsoever. And then the second impulse I thought was even more interesting was then deciding that he was going to correct the record. So it was just like it was a really interesting sort of in a way revealing moment, I thought. And I thought I was really touched when he went back to revise his version of events.
Well,
So
I remember it 8 years later, so it stuck with me that night. So has it ever been published anywhere? Is it out there somewhere?
that story.
That story itself?
Oh, yeah. I think I've given it. I've put it in speeches. I've told that story at a couple different at the keynote thing there at the symposium, and then I was speaking at a university a few years after that, and told it again because I gave a new version of that speech, and I think it might have turned up on I think it was Rutgers published a book on to coincide with Bruce's 70th birthday. And I think I revised the symposium speech and included that as an essay.
Okay, I'll check that out. It was just so well written, and I love the anecdote and everything. What
Thank
struck
you.
me in hindsight, or after the fact, is I remember clearly Tom Zimney came on to E Street Nation with Dave after they did the video for Dream Baby Dream.
Right.
And Tom described like what the process was with that with Bruce, as far as like, because they were picking very specific clips of fans at shows during that
Mm-hmm.
tour, and he had this crazy memory for there was this one show that we did in Sweden, and there was this one girl, and she had this one look on her face. Like he has this uncanny memory of fans and
Yeah.
specific moments. So that your anecdote fits right into that.
Yeah. No, I think it's weird. It's like I think like he remembers the faces of people who go to more than a few shows, and he especially the people who obviously he can see them if they're in the pit. But and apparently he had recognized my friend and his buddies because they were there. It was in at the Northwestern Swing in 2008, so they were there in Portland and then in Seattle. And I think by the time Ryan bumped into him in Vancouver, he had seen him 2 nights in a row, and I guess he said that he remembered them. So who knows? He probably does. I don't know. He,
Well, thank you for that. For those of you watching at home, welcome to the Spring Nut Cafe. It is our absolute honor to have Peter Ames Carlin here as our guest tonight. Uh, we interviewed Warren a few weeks ago, so you're a great follow-up to that for your own work. Howie is obviously the warden leader for the Spring Nuts unofficial fan club of Bruce, and then of course Stan.
of course.
What? Sorry. Okay, good.
For those of you that don't know, Peter is the author of several books. Amazingly enough, like it's almost a Mount Rushmore of musical icons. We got Paul McCartney, A Life, 2009. We've got The Reason We're Here Tonight, Bruce, and Tonight in Jungleland. 2016, Homeward Bound, from The Life of Paul Simon. You've also written about Brian Wilson, and REM came out 2 years ago. So yeah, like Paul McCartney, first major work. No, it was Brian. So you did Brian, Paul, Bruce, and
Paul
Paul
Simon
is, yeah.
came next.
So that's
Yeah.
like a Mount Rushmore of a certain window of rock and roll music. That's quite an accomplishment. So, I mean, you jumped in with Paul McCartney. So, can you give us a little bit of history about yourself, how you got into writing, how you decided to make that jump into writing book length studies?
Oh, well, I grew up here in Seattle, and I was always a little precocious in terms of music, so I was very, very into the Beatles, like when I was 3, and they were still around. I mean, that was when my parents had Revolver and Rubber Soul, like their 2 most recent records at that point, and I just like fell in love with them. And so through the late 60s, when there was a new Beatles album, someone would get it for me, or I'd see it at the store. And anyway, so that was like just really a definitive thing for me. And I sort of kept that with me, and through growing up, and got deeply into the Beach Boys, and then into Bruce Springsteen when I saw the Darkness tour, and had bought Darkness and Born to Run. And so these were all very, and then just through the time growing up, like any other dorky kid my age, I was always very into like whatever cool music I could get my ears around. And I went to college out here at Lewis and Clark in Portland, and ended up living in Portland for most of the next 40 years. And I started working as a writer pretty quickly after I got out of college. I got a job as a copy aide at the Oregonian newspaper in 1985. And you could freelance for the sections when you were a copy aide, and so I kind of ingratiated myself with editors, and they were nice, and and let me do a lot of bad writing for them on my way to learning how to be a publishable writer. Um, and so I stayed there for a couple of years, which sort of became a sort of graduate school, like a journalism school program for me, because I just bopped around the different sections of the paper and just tried to learn how to do this different kind of stuff. And I quit to freelance full time in 1987. I did that out of Portland for like 8 years and tried to work my way into national magazines and kind of work my way upward. And I published a couple books early in the 90s. One was a humor magazine parody, a magazine parody called Brave New Bride. And then I co-wrote a memoir for a woman who was a mountaineer that came out in 1993. And then I got this job sort of weirdly at People magazine. So I moved to New York and lived there for about 5 years and wrote for People. And then I became a TV critic back in Portland. So I moved back there at the Oregonian and did that for about 10 years. And along the way, one of the things I did at People in the late 90s was I talked him into letting me do a profile of Brian Wilson. So I got a chance to meet him and get to know him and his people a little bit. And I always wanted to write a book about him. And so I just I managed to get that going in around 2004. And that was the first book that I wrote that came out in 2006. And it just kind of went well. And so my editor said, what do you want to do next? And I thought, well, Paul McCartney, because I would, and he was like, okay. And so I went and spent a few years working on that book while also still being a TV critic. And that came out and that did pretty well. And so he said, well, what do you want to do next? And I said, Bruce Springsteen. And he's like, great. And I was like, really? So I started working on Bruce, and for the first year and a half, Stan knows the story inside and out. I've told it to him 100 times. So for the first year and a half, I didn't really have any access to him. They didn't know who I was, but I did know Dave Marsh a little bit. So I had talked to Dave before I got started when they had offered me the deal. And before I took it, I got in touch with Dave and I said, listen, I don't know if you're working on something. If you are, I'm not even going to try because obviously, it seemed like he had the franchise. And he said, nah, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's like, but I think you should give it a go. And he goes, but now you're going to ask me about access. And all I can tell you is you should submit a request like everybody does. The answer will be no. He said, but take that as a maybe. He said, so start working on the book that because basically he goes, what that means is if you need an answer now, the answer is no. But if you can wait, we'll see what happens. And so I took that to heart and I just started working on the book. And it occurred, and I just tried to talk to as many people as I could. And there was kind of an opening because for all the books that had been written about Bruce, no one had really done the thing of doing like, on the ground reporting. Dave's books were great, but he already knew Bruce and all the insiders. So he didn't need to go around and, march around Freehold and try to sweet talk the guy that cut Bruce's hair when he was a little kid. Which I did, and I got to know a bunch of people and I got really interested in just the whole, the socioeconomic past of Freehold and what it meant to live where Bruce lived and, who his friends were. And so there were just a bunch of these really sweet, nice people who had grown up and knew Bruce and adored him and were, really sort of had a lot of really cool, insightful stories to tell. So I worked on that. And then after like a year and a half of doing that, I got a call from John Landau, like out of the blue one day. who said like, well, we might be ready to cooperate. And I was like, go on, and unfortunately I was going to be in New York the next week. And he said, well, let's get a drink. And I was like, okay. So I met John, and he was like they had been, he told me later, like a long time later, I asked him, it's like, what were you thinking? Like, why did you open the door for me? And he just gave me this look, and he goes, did you think I wasn't watching you? So I think what happened was that he just spoke to people that I spoke to, or I think people would get in touch and say, this guy wants to talk to me about Bruce. Is it okay? And basically there was like, yeah, let us know what he's like. And so, and I guess I was asking the right questions, or not asking the wrong questions. Because it's like, if you're serious about it and and your impulses are relatively pure, I think that it's engaging to them. And they were at a point there where I think they were really starting to think about legacy. This was in around 2010, 2011. And I think they saw me as somebody who seemed like almost trustworthy. And so that, there was kind of a slow reveal. They opened the door to like one level of people, and then I went through that, and then more people and more people. And then eventually, the whole time for much of 2011, when this was taking place, John was kind of going back and forth. I was like, I think Bruce might talk to you. And then go, I don't know if he's gonna after all. And then he goes, but he might, I don't know, and that sort of went on and on. And then eventually he began to let me talk to his family. And I had this wonderful evening with his mom and his sister Ginny. Wow. And in the fall of 2011, I was out there, and which of course Bruce had okayed. And I was talking to his mom, and she said something casually about, well, Bruce. And I said, well, actually I don't. I mean, I know all about him, like all this stuff, but I've never met him. She goes, you never met him? I go, yeah, and then I said, I was like the most cynical thing I could have possibly said to this nice older lady. I said, what kind of a kid like sicks a reporter on his mom and he won't even open his door? And she was like, yeah. And so the next morning, but she was like, I mean, they knew I was joking around a little bit, but the next morning, I was in my hotel room, like transcribing the interview or something, waiting because I was going to go meet one of his aunts that afternoon, and my phone rang, and it was John, and I said, hey, how's it going? He goes, great. He goes, listen, Bruce wants to meet you. And I was like, yes. And then it was like, so he came to, and so John sort of laid it out, like, he'll come, he wants to introduce you to Aunt Dora, and then you can talk to her for as long as you want. He's going to go run errands, and then he'll come back, and then you guys can go have a drink. And sort of that's where it all where he and I began to get to know each other.
Peter, nice. You told me you were given the keys to the kingdom. I can't remember the exact quote,
yeah.
But I remember at a light of day, this had just happened. You said you were given the keys to the kingdom, was it? You told me?
Yeah, that's what John said. He said, I think I can get, he goes, I can give you the keys to the kingdom, which was like, but of course, like the kingdom has like, it's like a castle, you imagine a castle. So there's certain floors and certain rooms, but that's not necessarily where the king is, let alone the boss. But, so anyway, but it was kind of delightful. I mean, obviously for a whole variety of reasons, but one of the things that I really liked at the time meant a lot to me, was that this was a bunch of people who said what they meant and meant what they said. And at the time I was still working at the Oregonian, and in the kind of post-economic meltdown era where things were getting desperate and weird, and it was like you couldn't always depend on people in the organization who had positions of power to look you in the eye and actually tell you stuff that was real, or follow up on the stuff that they had said that they were going to do when they looked you in the eye. And so I got to a point near the end of the working on the book, where I had taken a book leave and I was supposed to go back to the Oregonian, and I was trying to figure out how I was gonna commit as much time and energy as I needed to Bruce's book while simultaneously having a full-time job. And Kevin Coyne, who's the great writer and historian in Freehold, I'd gotten to know, and he was extremely sweet and helpful and became a good friend of mine. And I remember I was telling him about this conundrum, and he gave me this look and he goes, I think you need to reconsider your commitment to this project. and I suddenly realized, like, if I was going to have to do a thing, it might as, if I was going to work with people, I would much rather focus on working with people like Bruce and John and those guys. And so that was the end of me in the Oregonian. And I never looked back. I never regretted that decision.
I remember you came to E Street Nation to talk to Dave and Jim out on E Street Radio. It was like, I know Dave. He and I were friends. We both love Elvis and Bruce, obviously, so we talk about Elvis all the time. But I remember you being there in the studio, and I just remember it was an interesting conversation. Dave can be prickly. We all know that. And I could tell that you were being respectful of him. No,
Yeah, right.
Dave Marsh, what? But you were being very respectful, and he was kind of quiet, and I couldn't tell like what was going on with him. But he paid you a compliment. He said you wrote a great book, and I couldn't tell if he was mad at himself. He said you had access to things that he didn't even think about. Like, he didn't even think about going to talk to his family. He didn't need to.
Right.
He had the major subjects. Why would he? So I think
Yeah.
that was the one thing I remember is, like, I think he wished that he had talked to some of the family back when he wrote his books, but whatever, neither here nor there.
Dave's book, especially that first book of his, Born to Run. I think that's the first book he published. Was just mind blowing. I remember just like gaping at that when I was in high school, and just like, my sort of Bruce mania or my passion for the work and for the artist was just like, it was like throwing kerosene on a fire, because of what Dave understood about sort of the, not just the artistic importance or the cultural importance of Bruce, but the spiritual importance, And I think that, which sounds like bullshit in a sense, or it sounds overheated and just like another baby boom guy, just, gibbering about Bruce. But I really feel like there's something about what Bruce brings to his work, to the music and, to the records and to the shows. That's just about like committing to something and being passionate about something and really investing something with your heart and soul in a way that was obviously, and I think we've all of us who have felt really touched by his work. I think a lot of it is just, especially, I remember seeing him for the first time in 1978 on the Darkness tour. And I used to go to a lot of shows back in those days, and I'd go see like almost anyone who came to town. So I saw a lot of crappy rock concerts, and mediocre ones that I thought were terrific. And then I saw Bruce on the Darkness tour, and I remember sitting there going, oh, like, this is what this is supposed to be, And I was just, I'd never been, even now, people, it's sort of a cliche. People say, oh, it was a life-changing concert. But it was like, I think that gets thrown around a lot, but for me, that actually was the case. Maybe not immediately, but it sort of set me on a slightly different course that took me in a different direction. And and through that, it wasn't just music. It wasn't just Bruce's music. It was an array of other things that Bruce, was interested in and sort of turned me on to just through association. And it was books, and it was a way of being and a way of being in the world, in a sense, and you can tell. And part of it, it's not because he's perfect. It's not because he's like a superhero. It's because he's not, but he works hard at trying to be better. And, and obviously he performs at a very high level, but it's like, but he'll, he screws things up from time to time, not, musically, artistically, but who doesn't, and so that to me was a lot of what was moving about, what was inspiring about understanding his work.
Peter, how did word get out to band members? You mentioned the family, that you have our permission from John Landau or Bruce. You have our permission to talk. So that was good for you. And did Bruce tell the band members? Landau tell the band members, or how did that work?
I don't know who said what to whom. I assume that probably John, because I mean, what would happen sometimes is John would just send me like an email with like 24 names and phone numbers and emails and stuff, and say, "Oh, here's the whole band." Like, and these are their personal assistants, and this is their numbers, and they know you'll be calling. So that obviously, everything got way easier at that point, as you might imagine.
Feel free to share that with us anytime.
Yeah, right. So it's, so that, and I assume that John maybe made the initial calls, and I don't know whether, I don't know anything other than that. I can kind of speculate like what happened. Like maybe some people would have, depending on what who their primary relationship was with, I'm sure there probably were people who got in touch with Bruce and said, "Is it cool if I talk to this guy?" And and I guess he said yes.
How about the old girlfriends? I mean, you had Joyce Heiser in there. Did you tell Landau you were going to approach them, or you just did that?
I think I just did that. I mean, there was a certain amount of stuff. If there were people that he got, I'm trying to remember exactly how I got. It's been a while, but I think but Bruce was very interested in me talking to all those people and reporting what they said, especially if things had gotten kind of like, if he'd gotten crossways with them. He was very intent in that moment I remember he told me, he goes, "Listen, when people talk about me like I'm a superhero, I feel diminished." He did not want to be, his whole sort of idea of being in the community was, I think, came out of the fact that their family had, felt so isolated and kind of marginalized in Freehold when he was young because they were so poor, and Doug Springsteen was kind of a little quirky, and their whole family was just sort of so I think Bruce felt like beneath society for a long time. But then when he became famous and people began to elevate him above society, I think he realized, like, well, now I'm marginalized in a completely different way. And I think I imagine that has a lot to do with why he still lives around Freehold, and why you just see him walking around on the streets there.
Yeah, and you even had a quote from Julianne Phillips, which was very impressive.
Well, she was very intent on not saying anything. But she's which of course is, I think, a measure of her grace and her, the caliber of who she is. And so, but we did have a little bit of a email exchange, and I think, I can't remember how I think I just begged her. I don't know what I said or did, but I think I just said, well, it would be cool just to get a sentence of you saying why you're, that you don't want to say anything in the book, but I don't want to put it in there and quote you and and blindside you with this. And however we did this, I mean, again, this was like 15 years ago, so it's a little less than fresh, but she was very, I mean, I just adored her. I mean, I can't even say that. I was impressed by her. And I remember speaking, I can't remember if it was Joyce or if it was, somebody who I'd spoken to was close friends with her. And I think they, to some extent, midwifed the exchange that we had. And so that happened.
Peter, there's two sections of the Bruce, and we will get to Night in Jungleland. I got plenty on that I want to talk about. I read this when it first came out, but I went back to reread it for the purposes of this. There was two things very early in the book that really caught my attention that speak to who he is. Um, Bruce did what he could to fit in. This is what about him going to school at St. Rose. He pulled on his
Hmm.
uniform in the morning, then marched proudly to school with Adele clutching his hand. He had his head held high when he walked in there, and I thought, good, Adele says. But what was going on during the school day? To see for herself, Adele took a break from work and stood across from the playground to check on her son during recess. And there he is, against the fence, all by himself, not playing with anybody. It was so sad. For Bruce, his tendency for social isolation came as naturally as his secret desire to be at the center of everything. We've all heard him talk, like he talks about this. He's written it in his book. He's very
Hmm.
much an introvert. Like that's where his process comes from. He's being an introvert. He's thinking, he's looking, he's observing. But when he gets on that stage, there he is. So I thought that
Yeah.
was just a very telling anecdote about him as a person at a very early age.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, because he is this very, I mean, public person in so many ways. And when you see him on stage, it's like this supersized character. Um, but that's kind of, but that's a creation to some extent, or a projection of who he really wishes he was all the time. Um, though it's hard to be that guy all the time, you can imagine. And I think in his mind there's a very big distinction between Bruce and the boss. Like the boss in some ways is a in some ways a character. And it's like, the mighty Oz and the little man behind the curtain, and he, so it's like, you see this big person, bellowing at you and holding 20,000 people in rapt attention, and can do anything to them. But on the other hand, I think he's probably a little less composed all the time with just like another person in the room. But I think that's, I mean, but obviously he's learned this incredible magic trick, which is being like the greatest rock star ever. you
Yes.
know so it's like, and that's a good trick to know, I mean, or to have figured out. I mean, and he worked really hard to master the various aspects of that craft, and and made his artistry, fueled by this incredible artistry that he has. But he's still, doing a performance.
The second part that really caught me was he's talking about his grandmother, Alice, passing away. That was a life changer, the end of the world for me. I don't remember anyone making a huge deal about my grandfather, but it was different when my grandmother died. My dad was really upset. And then this little paragraph that you wrote is excellent. The untended 110-year-old house on Randolph Street trembled on its long fractured foundation, vacated by Alice in 1962. It stood for only a few more months before the bulldozers rolled in. The house's weathered framework fell into a cloud of dust, then became a chalky pile of detritus hauled away in a truck. Once cleared, the property was rolled flat and paved over, cast for eternity as part of St. Rose's Church's parking lot. Bruce refused to look. I didn't go back for years after it was knocked down, he says. I couldn't go back and see the space. It was very, very primal for me. The stillness in the air, the desperate love of his grandparents, the adoration he had earned simply by being himself. This was the seat of his consciousness. His roots as deep and entangled as the ones anchoring the Irish beach still in the soil out front. I thought back, Bruce says, of the warped house that never stopped feeling like home, and realized it was the place I loved the most. 4 years later, he writes his biography.
Yeah.
It starts and ends with that tree, like that same exact situation. That's his safe
Yeah.
place. That's his happy place.
Yeah, I mean, and that was like a big meaningful thing for him, obviously. I mean, and he was, his grandparents worshiped him from the day he was born. And it was kind of, on the one hand, and Bruce has said himself, it was kind of a weird situation, and some, traditional parental lines got crossed, and people, and his grandparents kind of became his, as he said, as a small child, he thought of them as his primary caregivers. They were his parents, and his actual parents were relatives, clearly, but not the people who really cared for and adored him as much as his grandparents did. And so when Adele finally told Doug, listen, we got to get our own place, when Bruce was, I think, 7 or so, and they moved out, Bruce was like crushed, because it was like, he goes, as far as I was concerned, I had been taken away from my primary caregivers. Obviously, eventually he grew into a different understanding, but I think, that stuff that happens to you when you're that young. I mean, Bruce said it himself. I mean, this sort of primal experience was, it marks you forever. And he was still writing songs about it. You know, there are some of those outtakes from the earliest days of his songwriting in the early 70s where he talks specifically about his grandparents in really, haunting ways. And then, obviously they are, their spirits are deep in the grain of Nebraska as well.
All right, so that leads us into Tonight in Jungleland, The Making of Born to Run. For those of you out watching, if you haven't read it, you don't know what you're missing, as well as the biography. Can we just ask, like, what was the impetus for this book? You wrote the biography 12 years ago. Where did the impetus for this come from?
Well, I was, it's like everything, some combination of desperation and inspiration and timing, I guess. I mean, I guess it must have been in the spring of 2024, and I had finished the REM book, and I was sort of wondering what I was going to do next, and I sort of, scratched around with some other ideas for a while, for a few months actually, and I was really trying to kind of get a head of steam behind a thing, and then I was talking to my agent on the phone, and I said, like, almost like off the top of my head, I go, oh, and like a year and a half from now is going to be the 50th anniversary of Born to Run. Like, maybe I should try to do something about that. And there was like silence, and then he said, I think our work here is done. So then I got in touch with John and sent him a note. I mean, I kind of crafted this idea, and he wrote back saying, I think we might be interested in that. And so then I wrote a quick proposal, and that got sent to my editor at Doubleday, and he was like, yeah, we'll do this. So that got going real quick. But then it was like, but of course, he goes, publishing being what it is, and you have to have, like, in best case scenario, like a year between submitting the book and when it actually comes out, because of all the pre-publication stuff that has to happen. There are exceptions. You can squeeze out a little more time, but just the way that publishing works and the way the media works, in order to get like real momentum behind something, the people at the publishers really need basically a year to get it going in the right way. And so my editor said, well, the only hitch is you basically have to do it in 6 months, because we need it by the middle of the fall of 2024 to get it out by August 2025. And I was like, okay. And that was it. Like, my feet didn't touch the ground for another like 7 months. I mean, I just was going at full speed, and I went immediately, and started doing, going to various archives and flying here and there to talk to people. And then I went to, oh Lordy, I was anyway. And then in the fall of 2024, I went back to New Jersey for the Asbury Park show. And then I just hung out there for a couple of weeks, because Bruce was going to talk to me. But then there's always this interesting thing that happens between the time when Bruce says that he'll talk to you and the time when Bruce actually talks to you, or says like we can do it on this day. And then it kind of becomes real. So I went back east. I went back to New Jersey, and I just got an Airbnb in Neptune. And I just hung out there for like half a month. And I was simultaneously writing and drumming my fingers on the tabletop, waiting for Bruce. And I remember, and I had seen him he had me. He was really sweet, and he asked me to come to the after show party at the Wonder Bar after the Asbury Park thing. So I reconnected with him there, and we chatted for a while. And he said, "We'll talk in a few days." And I was like, "Great." And then like 10 days went by, and I was like, what are we? And then his birthday rolled around, and I guess that was like a week, like a little more than a week later. And I just texted him and said, "Hey man, happy birthday." It was like his 75th, and it was like a big deal. And and he wrote back going, "Peter, are you here?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "What are you doing today?" And I go like, "I don't know, like writing." And he's like, "Well, can you come over?" And I was like, "I'm on my way." And so I went. He had this beach house, and I went down there, and I picked up some tequila along the way, because I thought, like, there's no way you can go to see a guy on his 75th birthday and not bring him something. So I was like, well, what do I know that Bruce likes? I was like, ah. And so I picked up a bottle of tequila and went there, and we hung out for a few hours and talked, and it was great. I mean, he's a terrific interview, and he was very, very focused. Like, he had clearly been thinking about this stuff a lot, because during the summer, when I was doing some reporting, I would text him every so often to ask him, like, what the hell is this? Because I would occasionally find, I remember at one point I was digging through the archives of the Asbury Park Press, and I found a classified ad from, golly, was this the fall of 73, when he was looking for new members of the E Street Band? And he said, and among them, it was like he was looking for a keyboard player and a fiddle player. I was like, fiddle player? And I asked him, I was like, would you remember this? And he was like, because I'm sure it happened. It's like, kinda, not really. Every so often, if something came up, and it seemed that he was like really interested in digging into really digging into his memories on that period, because it was such an interesting, it was really, a transformative moment for him, because it could have gone either way. And he was well aware of that at the time. So it was, it was something that was, and then when we talked, it was very clear, just, the intensity of feeling around those events. And I think he was really, because he's been so successful for so long, I think it must be, it's clearly moving to him to remember when it felt like this might not really happen.
Yeah.
So on the prologue for the book, if you don't mind me reading this, because I think it set it up so well, and then you set out and did exactly what it was. A hot evening in late July 2024, my girlfriend and I were hosting a dinner party in our backyard, a small gang of writers, DJs, music fans holding court at the end of the table. Playing with the dog, looking relaxed and happy, was the music journalist and Bruce Springsteen chronicler Charles R. Cross, known to all of us as Charlie. God rest in peace. As the evening unwound, Charlie had plenty of stories to tell. After all, he had been writing about music since he was a kid at the University of Washington Daily, where I first read him in the 1970s when my professor, Dad, would bring the campus paper home. Charlie had gone on to edit the Seattle music newspaper, The Rocket. He wrote several acclaimed biographies of musicians, and he'd created Backstreets, the magazine devoted to Bruce Springsteen's career. It was one of those magical dinners that slips through the hours toward midnight, but we never got around to talking about the singular passion that bonded me and Charlie, the work of Bruce Springsteen. Then, after everyone was headed home, a small miracle happened. When he got to his car, Charlie discovered that his cell phone had run out of juice. His car door wouldn't open without it, so he came back to my house, hoping to bum enough charge to get on the road. Delightful! Now that everyone else had gone, he and I could talk about Born to Run and what I was trying to do with this book. I knew he'd have ideas. No one was smarter than Charlie about this stuff. It was already close to midnight, but he was brimming with enthusiasm and suggestions. When his phone finally woke up and he was about to leave, Charlie stopped for a moment and caught my eye. This is what you really need to figure out. Bruce's first two albums were amazing, he continued. Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey was a head-spinning debut. The wild, the innocent, and the E Street Shuffle expanded on its songwriting, arranging, and especially the sound. But both of those albums had flaws. A song or two that didn't work, some awkward performances, that sort of thing. Born to Run, on the other hand, he shrugged. He knew he didn't need to finish his sentence. We both knew what Born to Run was. That's what you need to find out, he said. What happened? What changed? How did it all get so great? He unplugged his phone, said his goodbyes, and left. Charlie died a week later. His question became my mission. This book is for him. How did it all get so great? And then you set out and did exactly that. I remember clearly, like I wrote down, there was 9 clear examples, and you probably have 1,000 in there, but 9 major things that happened during that process that led it to be great. So
Mm-hmm.
if you want to talk about some of those, I can I can go through what I wrote down, whatever you want to do.
Well, I mean, everybody grows up and gets better at their job. I mean, especially when you're that young. I mean, the amazing thing, a couple things that struck me was how young all these guys were, and particularly Bruce, who was starting to do like the work of his life, and also how quickly he went um, from Greetings in January '73 to Born to Run, to going from somebody who like couldn't give his records away practically, and was the scroungy kind of boardwalk rat type character, to being this, to being, and there's no way to put this gently, to being Bruce Springsteen, and when you look at the cover of Born to Run, and who he had become by then, and compare it to who he was just a year earlier and like a year and a half earlier, it's jaw dropping. I mean, the squirrely little guy in the hoodie, who used to travel with like a pair of jeans, the hoodie, a couple t-shirts, and a couple changes of underwear, like, because that's what he had, and Converse probably, what became the guy on the cover of Born to Run, who is an extremely different type of character, and a very, very, and an indelible type of guy. So, part of it, I think, is spending time, just doing nothing but working on his craft for 2 years, touring, as close to nonstop as they could, trying to learn how to write songs better, how to write music, how to play shows in a way that were, that resonated with audiences, and winnowing things down, and getting rid of this, carving away the stuff that wasn't working as well as the stuff that really worked, and focusing on that, and then evolving just as a person, and as an artist, as a writer, and as a performer. And that was important. I think Bruce always made really good decisions about who to have around him and who to work with. And Mike Appel was a great, was the perfect guy for him in those early years. And Mike, was really valuable in giving him some sense into how to, as much as Mike, loved that early kind of Shaggy, those long songs that kind of veered from here to there. He also understood, and he would tell Bruce, like, well, you could, edit, you could edit this stuff, you could simplify it a little bit and focus your message. And that's not necessarily about dumbing it down, like quite the opposite. You're not dumbing it down. You're just highlighting the really, really smart and perceptive and meaningful stuff that's in here, by not getting, veering off onto these tangents. And if you listen to like the early versions of She's the One, and I think and to some, especially the very early versions of Jungleland, that have like the little jazz digressions, and and little things that are kind of like, it's sort of a cool idea. It's like an extension of what he did on New York City Serenade, but it goes off a lot farther in that direction, or further, in that direction of kind of weird little things. But it's sort of like, how about not that? How about we, get rid of that stuff and focus more on this, the central story, the central narrative, these characters, and this journey that the Magic Rat is taking. So those are the things that jump out to me. And obviously it was super, it was transformative, and meanwhile he's going around and he's playing these things and seeing what people respond to, and the changes in the band were crucial, because Davey Sanchez is a brilliant artist and a fantastic player, but they were a very different band. And I think I think he had a magnetism about him that pulled Bruce off in that more jammy, sort of jazzy way, which I love that stuff. Like that Nashville show in January of '74 is one of my favorite Springsteen shows of all the ones that I have or have heard or have in my collection. And I'm continually puzzled and always hopeful that they don't release the E Street Band Mach 1 stuff. And I know that there is some thought that like, oh, well, the sound quality is not as good. But I think that as historical documents, that stuff is so important. And the band was so different and yet so great. It's like, I always feel a little like, man, I wish that period was more, that they would lean into that period a little more. Because it was awesome. Those like stretching Blinded by the Light out for like 11 minutes, and that kind of thing. And just these jams that would go on and on and on. And I played part of that show to Bruce when we were talking on his birthday. And he goes, man, we were a jam band, and it was like, yeah, you really were. And he goes, of course we were. He goes like, I could really play, Clarence could really play, Davey could really play, Danny could really play, all these guys. It was like, you could just throw the solo to throw the ball to anyone and they could just go rocketing off with it.
Thundercrack. Yeah. Back then.
Yeah, Thundercrack, he would do that, stretch that out to a fault, you could see him at that, golly, is it the, I can't remember which show, what I've heard there are certain times like when they did the Week to Remember show in LA that Clive Davis put together, and Bruce is up there and he stretches it out so far. It's like, is he trying to aggravate these people? Because like his solo, and he does this volume knob stuff, and he's sort of like, and it's like, what are you doing? It's like, I love virtually everything, so much of what Bruce has done. And I'm like, I am bored. Stop this. Move on. It's like, there are tighter versions of Thundercrack that are a lot of fun to listen to, but the volume knob solo thing where he's just, and everyone else is standing around like going, and it's like,
well.
it's just like, enough. Yeah. But anyway,
the things I wrote down, the change in, from Vinny to Boom, and then Boom to Max, Davey's out, Roy's in, change at CBS with Irwin Siegelstein coming in as the new president. That changed some things. Introduction of John, obviously, took it to that next level. Move to the and some of this is just practical stuff, like the move to the record plant. Louis La Havre is out, Jimmy is in. John advised him to change to overdubs instead of recording live in the studio, not the live recording. I didn't realize this, like, and some of the stuff that you get into is like stuff that was there, but it wasn't clear until you put it in words. I didn't realize that Danny is like not on Born to Run at all. Like Roy is playing any kind of organ parts that are on there. The one that really I love, and you write it so well. If we had been left to Mike and Bruce's devices, we would have Linda, Let Me Be the One, or A Lonely Night in the Park instead of Meeting Across the River. And Mike had the horns come in. They laid it out. And Mike is like, I don't know what the fuck you two are listening to, but this is a song that we're putting on the album.
Right. Yeah, no, it was, those guys all brought out the best in each other. And, one of the things that, I think Bruce really gives Mike credit for, is that when he said, listen, I want to work with, I think we should bring in John Landau to be a co-producer. And Mike, who was a co-producer and had all this, influence over Bruce, was like, okay, great. That's what you want. That's what we'll do. And I think it actually cost Mike money because I think he had to give up like some of his percentage, to give John the kind of deal that that he was going to require to to spend the time to produce the record. And I and obviously there was some tension between those two guys because they were both in some ways, I mean, I think this became more clear later. They were both trying, they were competing for Bruce's ear. But on the other hand, Bruce loves, that's how Bruce wants things. He wants to have two poles that he can kind of like orbit back and forth between, because so having two strong voices competing with him, competing with one another to give him advice, as he said to me, it's like it's the rule of three. It's like, and he went through his life and talked about like how he has sort of like created the same kind of ecosystem structure around him throughout. And for this moment, it was Mike and Landau, and and they were not always thinking of things, in exactly the same way, and it could get tense. But on the other hand, John had, Mike had the emotional maturity to say, yeah, if this is what Bruce says he needs, this is what Bruce is going to get. And then later, John was able to tell Mike, like with Meeting Across the River, like, you were right, I was wrong, like this is great, like thank you for being the evangelist on this one. So it's just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I was gonna say it's easy to like look back on and say, "Oh my God, how could you possibly put Lonely Night in the Park?" And says, but if that's how we do it, then that's how we would know it. But it's hard,
Yeah.
at this point in time to go back to that. But you're right. Like John was very clear. Like you were right, we were wrong. Like you were totally right about that.
Right.
But my God, for us to not have Meeting running into Jungleland, like that would have totally changed the
history
album.
And they figured that out, I mean, and so and but Bruce is like stubbornly holding on to Lonely Night in the Park is like a lost classic. And he's like, oh yeah, he told me, I think in 2024, he goes like, oh yeah, we're going to put that one out. Like that's one that's like rare. That's a great one. And I'm like, okay, it's like, I never want there to be less Bruce Springsteen music out in the world, but it's not one of I prefer Linda Let Me Be the One, but of course that's been out already. But that's like a kind of a cool and weird song. And there's like some sort of Linda Let Me Be the One, I mean, and it's got, I mean, one thing that was interesting to me listening to those songs back to back a few times was that it's like, Linda Let Me Be the One seems to me to be clearly set in Freehold, and Lonely Night in the Park is clearly set in Asbury Park. Because if you think about Linda, it's like stuff is happening in church basements, in people's parents' houses. There's this whole bit where the narrator of the song, carves Linda's name in the upholstery of her dad's car, which I had to think was an awkward moment for both the dad and Linda. I was imagining that. Bruce didn't think this was funny, but I remember telling him, it's like, I'm old enough now where I immediately associate, I kind of identify with the dad. And I'm imagining this guy with his cup of coffee in the morning going out to his car going, what the? And then like, Linda, I don't think you should date this boy. I mean, so there's like that childhood type. I said that to Bruce and he sort of was like, he didn't think it was as funny as I did. But but then Lonely Night in the Park, it's all happening on the beach and there's strip clubs and heavy drinking and partying and stuff going on at 3 a.m. And so it seems like that character is older by the time he gets to Lonely Night in the Park. That's my interpretation of it. Everyone's mileage may vary.
Did you talk to him more after you met him on his birthday down at the beach house? Were there follow-up conversations too, Peter, after that with Bruce?
I'm trying to remember. I think that might have been, I might have had to, at that point, I kind of, one of the ways when you're, in my experience of him when I've been writing these books is that he likes to be the last guy that you talk to, so he can kind of swoop in at the end and correct, or whatever, and bring his feelings, his take on things at the end. And we had been in touch sort of through the summer, and like I said, mostly just via text. And he would, if I spoke to him again, I think we did talk after that, because we did talk after he had read a draft of the book, and then he just had some thoughts. But, he never asks to change anything. He's very good about that, which is delightful. And he just had, I think he liked it. I think he just thought that, I don't even remember if he had any specific thoughts or things that he thought I might want to change. I remember once when I was working on finishing up Bruce, because I let him look at the to look at the manuscript of that. And he had a couple just really factual corrections. And there was one where I had mistakenly, in a footnote, I think, said that the book, whatever reason, I had said that the book about Starkweather was In Cold Blood, which it wasn't. It's this book by Nanette Beaver. And he said very gently, he goes, yeah, that wasn't that book. It's this other one. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he said, yeah, you don't want to fuck. He said, you don't want to fuck that up. And so I appreciated that a lot, because it was like saving me. But I remember writing that footnote like late at night, it was like crashing the thing and like sitting there at like after midnight at some point in the little basement office I had at the time. And sometimes, you toss things in there and you think, I'll check this later, or you don't even think to check it because you just go, yeah, no, I'm sure. Like Truman Capote wrote this book that was about, it's like, it was a really stupid mistake, and he saved me from myself there. So I appreciate that. Appreciated it then and still do.
He paid you the highest compliment at the Monmouth University Symposium back in last September. He said,
yeah,
thank you for writing the book. I believe those were his words, that he was glad you did it. That had to feel great for you. Yeah.
Yeah. it was a nice day out. It was the whole thing was kind of, the whole day was very extraordinary and intense and everything. And that was just kind of like, well, that happened, like, wow. And I thanked him for that later on stage or after the whole show, the whole business ended. And, it's super gratifying. I really appreciate, obviously it's like one of the great, things in my career, and just, especially given the years and years I spent listening and thinking about his work and and all that stuff, just like every other fan. And then I got this opportunity to spend time writing about, thinking about him and writing about him and going around and talking to all these people and then getting to know him a little bit. And then it turns out that like he's, there's always and this has happened to me a bunch, just doing all the, the work that I've done. Yeah, occasionally you get the opportunity to meet someone who's like a real, a hero of yours, someone who you've admired for a long time. And that is both thrilling and terrifying because you don't know if they're going to say or do something that's going to wreck it. And I was like terrified to some extent meeting Bruce, because it's like, what if what if he didn't like me? Like that could happen. It happens a lot. A lot of people don't like me, and they have their reasons. And or something could, it's like you just don't know sometimes. But of course, it turns out that he's, somebody had told me a year earlier, somebody before I had met Bruce or knew that I was gonna, I asked somebody, well, like, what's he like? And this guy said, and I thought this was the wisest thing. He goes, he's exactly who you think he is. And I was like, got it. Because it's like, I didn't think that he was a superhero. I didn't, because it's like, you can't listen to his music with any depth or any real, concentration and not realize this is a complicated and at times dark guy, and that hanging out with this guy isn't always going to be like fun and frolic, because he's got some depth, I mean, a lot of depth and a lot of darkness down there. And so much of his work is about sort of pondering like these issues of morality and ethics and the things that you do that are just flat out fucked up, and then you have to come to terms with how that happened and who you are and what are you going to do to fix the fuck up. It's like, that's huge. And it's like, you don't write stuff like that, certainly not as well as he does, without having experienced that like in your real life in real time. And and that was one of the things that I think he really was hoping I was going to get across in his biography. And he was toward the very end of that process, after he had seen the manuscript and we had talked about it, he said, I remember we were on the phone, and he said, listen, if you learned anything about me that you didn't put in there because you think it might hurt my feelings or be embarrassing for me, put it in.
Wow.
And I was like, and I hadn't really pulled many punches. There were one or two things that I thought I wasn't sure about that seemed gratuitously like maybe went a step too far. But it was like, to the extent that I wanted to impress Bruce, I knew that wasn't going to happen by me whitewashing anything. Like, he wanted the complexity in there. And even if he didn't want the complexity in there, it was going to be there because that's my job. And it's like, I couldn't write a book or publish a book that didn't have like the real screwy stuff of what it's like to be a human. Because that's what he's about. And also that's what's interesting when you're writing someone's story. I don't like to write, I'm never going to write like a takedown book where you extrapolate everything as far out as you can to make someone look horrible because that's going to get tabloid headlines. Like, I don't think that's fun or interesting. But it was like, I remember I was talking to, it's been, the photographer, the woman who dated in the late 70s.
Lynn Goldsmith.
Lynn Goldsmith, who is delightful too. She's really delightful. And I talked to her, and she talked about that night at the No Nukes show, where Bruce got really mad at her because she saw her taking his photo and taking photos, which she was the chief photographer that night. Like, she's this completely accomplished photographer. She was in charge of all the photos, the photographers, and making sure these things were done. And so she's there taking Bruce's photos at the show and trying to stay out of his sight, back, where the photographers were, not up against the stage. But he got I think it was also his birthday. It was his 30th birthday, or he got quite cross, as they say. And he leaped off the stage, and she said that she could see him, and like, he caught her eye. She said, I didn't like the expression on his face. Like, he was clearly pissed. And then he leaped off the stage and grabbed her and dragged her up on stage. And he pissed everybody off because that was when he was with Pam, or not Pam, I'm sorry, Joyce. And they had just gotten together. And Joyce described being at that show, or being backstage at the show and watching from the wings. And Bruce said he grabbed Lynn, thank you. Yeah. And apologies to Lynn if she sees this. She's delightful. She's great. I'm sorry, I'm spacing out. So, and he said, this is my ex-girlfriend. But what Joyce heard was, this is my girlfriend. And Joyce was like, what? So she's mad because she thinks that Bruce just dragged this other woman up on stage and introduced her to the crowd as his girlfriend. But meanwhile, Lynn is mad because he grabbed her and was not gentle as he, kind of roughed her up on the way to the stage. And she had said to me, I felt like he was going to break my arm. And I thought, I reported that whole episode vividly, but I didn't put in the arm breaking line because I sort of thought like, well, we get the gist of it. And I don't think Bruce is a physically abusive on that level, but maybe he was, he was juiced up. He was on stage. Everything is otherworldly up there. Maybe he just didn't realize how strong, whatever. But I felt like this was, I don't want to even imply that he was. So I asked Bruce, I go, oh, when he said, like, put stuff in that's going to be embarrassing, I said, okay, well, what about this? And I described that to him, and he was quiet for a second, and he goes, yeah, put it in. And I was like, ooh, okay. So I did, and so my apologies if anybody thought that means that Bruce is physically abusive to his girlfriends, because I don't think that he has been. I mean, I think there have been one or two weird early on occasions where he lost his shit in a way that no one ever should, but it wasn't like over the top. I mean, it was, but obviously not good, and obviously something he regretted, and they all adore him. So it's not like, so, and that was nice to hear that all the exes over the.
He was not in a good mood that night. He was pissed about his birthday. There was a cake. Dave talked about this. There was a cake involved, and he threw it or something.
Yeah.
That whole thing. So he was not in his normal frame of mind
No.
that night.
No.
Stan, sorry.
Along those lines, Peter, one of my favorite parts of your Bruce book was when you asked Bruce's mother about when he graduated high school. And they had a party planned for him at the home, but he decided to go into Greenwich Village. And you asked Del Springsteen, what are your recollections of that? And she said, why don't you ask him to tell you that story?
Yeah, she was so pissed about that. And I that night with her and Ginny, they were like a comedy team, the two of them, because they had, and they were just like bouncing off each other. And it was like one of the most delightful nights of the whole thing, the whole experience, just because she, because Bruce's mom is so sweet and loving and just radiated warmth and kindness, and Ginny, of course, is the same way. And I remember his mom had brought out this big box of like his old school work to show me, because she was really proud of the short stories that he wrote for when he was in community college, because he would write these, he was in a writing class, in a fiction writing class, and she was showing me, and there was that one story about the little girl dressed in white who gets run over or something, and she showed that to me and said, I thought he was in trouble and something was wrong with him when he wrote this one, because this one kind of, upset me. It's like, anyway, so that was interesting. But, it was, I mean, I can't remember the initial question. I've been going on and on, but I mean, yes, exactly. But she and Ginny were very like, it's like he's just her son and Ginny's brother, and they grew up with him and knew him when he was a snotty little kid, and that's the guy that they know and love. I mean, that's who he is. And they don't see I mean, they're very, very proud of his achievements and his work and everything, and the fact that he became who he is. But I mean, when he comes over to their house, he's just Brucey, I mean, I remember at Dora's house that night, the first time I met him that afternoon, I was talking to her, and he came back from running his errands, and he was really gracious and didn't want to like step on my interview. So he sat at the kitchen table, and she heard him come in, and she could see him from where she was. And she said, Bruce, come in here and bring a chair. And and so he was like, yes, ma'am. And he came in, and he was like a good nephew. I mean, he was very very sweet to her, and very, and he was minding his P's and Q's, as you do with elders in your family. And nothing about being globally famous and super rich and successful changed anything in that dynamic.
Peter, one section of the book that really caught my attention and put it in perspective, because, as we all know, Bruce was raised Catholic. He is Catholic. He thinks in that ideology. But for me, as an outsider, you just put it in a way to encapsulate it in a way that I could better understand it. talking about Jungleland, which is a fascinating little piece about how that whole thing came up, of what we know as Jungleland came about with the Howls. You go through this in
Mhm.
detail, and fantastic. What did Jimmy say, or what did he say? I think Jimmy, get it ready to go. I think I've got something.
Yeah.
Um, for Landau, who had staked his reputation on declaring Bruce the future of rock and roll and then risked his own career as a writer, critic, and editor by signing on to be his favorite artist co-producer, it's not a stretch to hear the songs of Born to Run in religious terms. Look, this is John. Look, the album begins with a woman named Mary, he says, and those howls at the end of Jungleland, which is the end of the album, Landau knows what it's supposed to symbolize too. It ends with an allusion, in my opinion, to the crucifixion. So birth, life, and death. That's the album. Landau knows how this sounds. He understands that he's been Bruce Springsteen's partner in music and business for 50 years, and before that, he was Bruce's most prominent cheerleader. If anyone on the planet could be said to be a committed Bruce Springsteen fan, it's Landau. So he's questioned his own interpretation, too. Was it planned that way, or am I just overly literary type? Interpreting. Well, I'm not sure exactly what I think, but I believe all those cross currents are embedded in the fabric of the album. And when you're talking about religion, you're talking about elevation and elation on one hand, and you're talking about pain and suffering on the other hand. And those things are all on our album. I just had never put it in that kind of framework of mind. So kudos to you for that.
Well, I was just sitting there and John said all that. And I was just like, cool. I didn't ask him, like, hey, is this a biblical allegory? Because that never would have occurred to me. But, I could tell, obviously Bruce had been inspired by, growing up and being, educated as a Catholic, as a little guy. And then was, there's a bunch of those songs that the Bruce Springsteen band did, or no, Steel Mill did, that are like he's clearly alienated from Catholicism at that point. And I don't think that I wouldn't say that he is a Catholic, a serious practicing Catholic at this point. I think he has faith or religion of a sort, but it's much more, I don't know if ecumenical is the right word. It's not this, the Catholic liturgy per se. But he was definitely inspired by it. And if you're a songwriter or a poet or an artist of some sort, obviously Catholicism offers you a lot of material to work with. But the Bible goes across in those, the story of the Bible, and Jesus goes, in the New Testament goes through crosses over a lot of different barriers. So, but then he had said that, I think Landau said that, John said that, and I think I can't remember when I talked to John, if it was in the early summer when I was back east or whether it was the late summer, but he told me the biblical thing. And then when I saw the Asbury Park show and Bruce played Jungleland, in the end, when he's doing those howls and he gets to the final howl, with the super intense stuff, he actually, standing by the microphone, raises his arms like this, into the cruciform position.
Wow.
And I was like, and so then when I went to talk to him after the show, and I asked him about it, he goes like, and this is kind of back to the I don't remember your friend mode. He goes like, did I do that? Like, I don't remember. I guess I must have. And I was all like it's completely unconscious of it. It's like I wasn't really aware of that. And I was, kind of like, okay. But then a week later, when I talked to him on his birthday, and I said, John says that this is kind of a biblical allegory, and it starts with Mary, ends with, what John says is a sonic allusion to the crucifixion. And Bruce just shrugged and says, "Yeah, that's about right." So, and I was like, "Well, that's kind of cool. That feels like news." And so I put it in the book, and a couple people writing about the book and this really nice guy, wrote a review for I think it's the Times Review of Books in England, in London. And he said, he described that as a theory. And I go, it would be a theory, except for that the guys that made the record said that was their intention. Then it's no longer a theory. It's a thing that happened, And And so I asked anyway, but it was like, but it's a striking thing. Like ordinarily people don't cop to saying, yeah, I guess I'm a little, or whatever. I was doing a different version of the story of Jesus, because that's, you're biting off a lot with that one. But then when you look at, like, you don't have to look at or listen to the early versions of those songs, especially on Thunder Road. The woman in that song before she became Mary was Christy or Angelina. All these different they're all angelic, and or literally the mother of Jesus. But you're biting off a lot. But the amazing thing is it works. Like he stuck the landing on that one. So, good job, Bruce.
The other
Are you
piece
working
that
on
really,
another book?
oh, sorry,
I'm
sorry,
sorry,
sorry.
Brian.
No,
Are
no,
you
go ahead.
working on another book now, Peter, on somebody, or could there be another Bruce Springsteen book picking up where Bruce left off down the line?
I don't, it's hard to say. I'm working on a thing. It's in sort of proposal stage right now, so it's not something I can really go jabber on about as much as I like to. Well, anyway, so that's, yes, something is brewing, and hopefully I'll have more to talk about in a few weeks. But in terms of doing a different book about Bruce, listen, I never thought I would have written Tonight in Jungleland until it suddenly occurred to me as a thing that I might be able to do. And they were extremely gracious and opened up to me again. And I don't, whether they would have the appetite to do that a third time, or whether, I could come up with another idea that would be, that would, I don't know. I would never say no, but I can't imagine it. But there's a lot of stuff that's happened that I couldn't imagine until it happened. So, so maybe.
Yeah. What year Bruce came out? What, 2012?
2012.
Yeah,
Yeah.
14 years. A lot of stuff has happened.
Yeah. Well, people, the when you write books about these guys that are like these big artists who have been around forever, like the big challenge is like, what do you do with the later years? Because because what really makes a story is the tension, it's the becoming, and the trying to be someone, and then doing the big kind of breakthroughs. But after you've been at it for a long time, like Bruce has, it's like he makes beautiful records. But like, for instance, Western Stars, like I love that record. It's one of my favorite Bruce Springsteen records. I could go on and on and on about that album. I love that album. And I think it's right up there with like the top tier of Springsteen records. The story of making that record, I think, is like, it doesn't have like those moments of crisis and loss of faith, and like the challenge was strictly, it's a little weird that he recorded so much of it like 8 or 9 or 10 years before it actually came out. But on the other hand, he does that a lot, right? So, and it's like, here's this guy who's been at this for 55 years. He's really good at making records. He's really good at writing songs. He writes great songs, and sometimes songs that are less great, but they're still like, but even his less great stuff is still pretty good. It's like Sex and Pizza and Bruce Springsteen songs. Even when they're not that good, they're still pretty good. So, and so it's like, but it's less exciting to write about the later years, because by that point they really know what they're doing, and Smooth Sailing is great, except for, and the work is really cool and stuff. I think his role in politics, or as a kind of as a public American, I think is interesting to me. Because he's, he says a lot of meaningful stuff, that I happen to agree with. And so, and I think, he's been really gutsy, especially in the last year, of like, speaking his truth and saying stuff that, a lot of other people haven't really had the courage to say. And I think it's making an impact, and I'm really looking forward to the new tour. I think that's I'm going to get to see him in Portland in a few weeks. And so I'm super super looking forward to that. And my my youngest son lives in Minneapolis, and so he's had to live through a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I made sure that he got tickets to see him open the tour there.
Oh, great.
So, but anyway, I mean, that's interesting to me. I mean, Bruce Springsteen, colon American.
Peter,
Did I ever
agree with
tell you guys? I can't remember. I'm sure I probably told Stan this story during the reunion tour. I was living in New York, and I went to see a show in I got to see a few shows on the reunion tour, and I saw him at Madison Square Garden, and it was right around the time that he had started playing 41 Shots, American Skin. And it was hugely controversial because people were just willfully misinterpreting the song and saying, like, he's ripping the cops. And it's like, well, I don't know. If you listen to the song, he so clearly isn't, but obviously that's not your agenda. So, and so, like, there was a whole thing where the NYPD didn't want to, do security, and they were being kind of, frankly, dicks about the whole thing, and stubbornly not listening to the song to understand what, in fact, he's actually saying. And anyway, so I'm seeing the show, and he played that, and he played that song, and there was a guy sitting in the row ahead of me. He was like this big, he looked like a Staten Island kind of guy, and I don't know if he was a cop. He looked a little like a cop, and he sat there, and he folded his arms on his tummy and sat stock still through the whole song without moving, and was clearly bent out of shape. And then a little later, Bruce played that version of Born in the USA, where it's like the country blues, like leaving, like you could not hear that version of the song and think that this is like a patriotic thing. Hey, we're born in the USA and everything's great. Like, that's not the meaning of that song. And then he's singing, born in the USA, I was born in the USA. And the guy, who might have been a cop, goes like this. He goes, and if you don't like it, you can fucking leave. And then, like 40 minutes later, the guy is dancing around to Rosalita. So
usually what happens.
Right. People, I think, like, and like the fact that, like, Chris Christie was such a huge Springsteen fan, or still is. It's like, do you listen to the songs? It's like, maybe there's just a lot of stuff that you just avoid, but it's like, and I guess if you can, I guess I don't understand. I can understand why people would like certain Springsteen songs, but Chris Christie is one of those guys who seems like it's kind of like religion to him. And it's like, what are you listening to and what aren't you listening to? Because it's like, it's not between the lines. It's right there. So it's like, but whatever. I mean, I guess if people can look past that stuff and just connect with the stuff that they love, then it's better than just, I guess just, I don't know. I mean, good for them, I suppose.
Peter, I agree with you. I think he's there's a line that runs between Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Bob, and Bruce, citizen artists, people that use their power to sing and get it out there and express, and they do a good way of summing up, the gist of the time that we're living through. One last question from me, and then whatever else the other guys got. So you looked at McCartney, Simon, Brian Wilson, and Bruce. Similarities, things that you think drive them, to be great artists in their own different way. Anything?
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot of the time, writing about these guys, I end up writing a lot about depression, which isn't necessarily a Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney's like immune to that somehow. I mean, he's had tragedy in his life, obviously, starting with the death of his mother when he was young. I mean, and that was one of the things that really cemented him and John Lennon early on. So he had to recover from that, but he's always had this kind of unsinkable good cheer, at least, that we see. And he doesn't really let his internal darkness intrude too much on his art. But all those guys, Brian Wilson, I mean, obviously his mental illness and his fight against it, and eventual triumph over it is a huge part of his story. And the and his sort of engagement with his music and his art has always been impacted by the fact that he was in some way, neurodivergent, like in serious ways. And it wasn't always easy to be Brian Wilson, just living inside his skin, even in the best of times. Bruce obviously, has had, experiences with depression, and, mental illness was a factor in his family, through his father and some other folks there. But and he's been very, forthright about that. And Paul Simon is like head clutchingly, has had really difficult times in his life. And he gets like writer's block that's like profound and painful, and he is in many ways kind of a darker type of character. And who else have I written about? The guys in REM are much more fortunate in that sense, I think. But I mean, those are some of the things. It's like, I think to me, a large part of trying to understand an artist and their art is trying to understand kind of the psychic space that they live in. And often, people, I think a lot of times people, particularly Brian Wilson, a lot of these guys, if you're living with a kind of darkness, you're trying to use what energy you have to take those dark feelings and channel them into some kind of light, and create, and that's where, Paul McCartney, obviously the Beatles were just like an endless rainbow of light, coming from a bunch of guys that grew up in the rubble of World War II, most of them not having a lot of money, and Lennon coming from a particularly sort of screwy family and everything. But it's like, those are the things that I think, are that to me is what's really interesting about these artists, and what that process is like. And I always think it's very moving when somebody can take some internal darkness and channel it into something that lights the lives of people all around the world. If you have the power to do that, that's astounding. But I think part of the problem of being that person is that your experience of that is less full of light. That's the people who are listening. The darkness doesn't always go away just because you've succeeded at channeling it in some ways. Right. It doesn't make life easy always.
I heard a great quote from George Harrison, and somebody said to him, like, "Oh my God, you brought us so much joy." And George's answer was, "Well, yeah, but it came at the cost of our nervous system. Like, we would cry by the time we were done." So we're all getting this joy and enjoyment and having these spiritual experiences at concerts, but that comes at a cost to those that are giving it to us.
Yeah. Well, the REM guys, I think a lot of what served them very well, they all came out of really solid, good families and felt really loved and supported as kids. And particularly Michael, which is, but I think that one of the things that really benefited them was the fact that they spent 10 years working at it and slowly becoming more and more successful before they really broke through. And by the time they really broke through, their relationships between them were very solid. They had found a bunch of people who were trustworthy and had their best interests at heart. And they, by the time the big spotlights came on, they had the emotional wherewithal to withstand the surreal aspects of being super famous. And in a way, so did Bruce, because, he was, by the time Born in the USA really made him a super duper star, he had been at it for almost, 15 years practically, and was in his mid 30s. And, I don't think he had some, he still had some growing up to do, and had some things to deal with. But, but he was in therapy by then, and kind of had developed a lot of tools that were going to help him withstand the sort of surrealism of superstardom.
One final thing from me, Peter. I enjoy seeing all your books in the background, the music books. But what got me is Ball 4.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that reminds me when I was in fifth grade, I loved baseball. I brought the book to school. I was called to the principal's office and told, take it home and do not bring it back. So I just haven't seen that in years. It's like, I'm just so happy to see that book there. It was so ahead of its time.
Oh God, I know. I started reading that book when I was little because my big brother and my dad were into it, and also, I grew up in Seattle, and that most of the book takes place with it's that one and only season of the Seattle Pilots, right? And so that was a thing, and I just remember like it was so hilarious. And then later, as I got older, and I developed, sort of a more sophisticated sense, first of all, of professional sports, and then more of a sense of the nation and society and that era. But then later, as I began to focus a lot more on writing, I began to realize like this is one of the most innovative memoirs, really, because he's not really writing. I mean, he's writing very vividly about baseball and what it was like to be a professional baseball player in the late 60s. But what he's really writing about is about America and about these institutions and how conservative and stultifying they could be, especially in those days. And the knuckleball, which is his pitch,
Right.
is like such an incredible metaphor, because it's like his coaches, like he's really successful throwing the knuckleball, but it's not something that you can teach or coach. It's like you know the grip and you figure out how to do it. And if the wind cooperates, you're golden. And if it doesn't, you're fucked. But he would be very successful pitching. He'd pitch like he'd pitch relief, and get like 4 or 5 scoreless, hitless innings. But his coaches were still trying to get him to go back and play and throw the fastball he couldn't throw anymore because he hurt his arm, because they didn't understand it. And it was like a metaphor for his individuality. And they were like, don't be different. You can't be different. No one should ever be different. And that's like, so it's this incredibly funny, very, very vividly detailed book that includes, almost, I don't know if it was accidental or not, but it's like the story of America told in this kind of microcosmic way.
Yeah, I got to reread it. Now, I got to get a copy of it again and reread it.
I read it all the time. I reread it, and I was been so gratified because 2 of my kids, my eldest son and my stepchild, and my eldest son lives in Portland, and my stepchild lives in Chicago, individually emailed me and said, "Hey, I've been reading Ball 4. It's amazing." And I'm like, yes.
Howie, anything for
Howie,
you? Wrap up?
Howie, Julie, if you don't ask Julie's question, you're going to be in trouble after this, buddy.
I'm
So,
already in trouble. What was Julie's question? Oh,
Peter, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. She wants to know. So Julie is one of the people. She's my wife. She's the co-founder of Spring Nuts, but unfortunately she wasn't feeling well tonight, so she couldn't. But she's joining us virtually. But she does have a question. She wants to know, what do you think about U2?
Oh, hi, Julie. What do I think about U2? I saw a U2 show on the What You Can't Leave Behind tour, 2001, I think it was, All That You Can't Leave Behind. And I've been listening. I've known their work for 45 years. There's a lot of it that I really like. I was never a huge fan. And now I have a little bit of an issue because I'm married to someone who cannot stand them. And I don't know exactly what her deal is. I think that, but on that matter, she's got really great taste for other things, but she's not a U2 person. So I can't just be casually spinning U2 around the house or I get into trouble. And so there's that. But I mean, there's a lot about them that I really adore. And there are certain, but it's like, it's less of a natural fit for me. But I absolutely admire them. And, and there's dozens of their songs that I, have lived with for years and years and years and really love. So, net positive, but it's just it's a little ticklish around these parts.
It always cracked me up when Bruce inducted them into the Hall of Fame. He says, U2 is the last band that I'll be able to name all 4 members of the band.
Yeah, right. Well, and Bono can be a very like gracious and funny and cool character, but it's like, but I think his monolithic sort of profile that his version of himself, the public Bono, is first of all, he's named Bono. And second of all, it's like, but I mean, he's got that amazing voice and everything, and they write a lot of great songs and stuff, but there's a magnificence to him that is, and also it's hard to not completely admire the amount of work that he's put into, it's one thing to be, make declarations about, virtue and justice and all these things. It's another thing to do the work. And he gets into the work on that level of like, I mean, he's in Africa, he's lobbying politicians, he's like doing serious advocacy work. And that's, I mean, that's a huge deal. I mean, I know, and he's he understands the virtue of compromise, which at times can feel awkward because in that realm of public protestation and statementing, most people tend to paint in primary colors, like this is good and this is bad. You don't like to think about the kind of, in some way, how the sausage gets made when you're actually doing legislation. But on the other hand, legislation is what actually affects people's lives, most of the time. So Mazel Tov, Bono, is what I have to say.
All right.
Nice.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have something else?
Okay. No, just one question for myself. So since you were so engulfed in, making the, Born to Run, well, it's a two-part question, and one of them I'm stealing your thunder a little bit, Ryan. Don't mean to do it, but it's the way my question is going. So do you have a certain favorite from the Born to Run album? And, one of the questions that we do ask is, what is your favorite Springsteen album? And it's a loaded question, like Ryan says, it changes, but we'll go with stays.
All right. Well, okay. So my favorite song on Born to Run, again, I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, there's certain songs that, but ultimately, like in a way, I have this real intense feeling for Night because it's one of the ones you hear less. And so when it comes on, and I love, and I think I got to write about this in the book. The one line that always blows my mind is, when he's describing this guy's experience of being in his car and looking for this girl and going out to, he's becoming who he wants to be. That guy's becoming his version of the boss when he gets in his car at night and he goes off and roars off onto the strip. And he's talking about the light turning green, and with your faith in your machine, off you scream into the night. And then here comes the killer line, and you're in love with all the wonder it brings. So it's like the camera zooms up in the sky, and you get the sense of like, it's like he understands, he's like telling you exactly what the power of this moment is, the metaphorical power, not the power of the engines, not the power of, turbo something, but the feeling of it. And I love it when he does that interpretive stuff. My favorite Springsteen album is hard. I revert to, I always say, I had such a strong connection to Darkness.
Me too.
When it came out, and that was the one I kind of came in on. Like I had heard, obviously I knew Born to Run. I had heard the singles or whatever, the radio songs that were off the first couple records, but there was something about the voice of the characters that Bruce is, singing through on that album, and the story that he's telling, and this idea of confronting adult life and adjusting to the idea that there is something, and I was 15 when that record came out, and it was the first time I heard something or experienced something that made me feel that there was something glorious about just being a working person. And the job that you do day in and day out, and that I've done my best to live the right way. I get up every morning and go to work each day. And it's just like, but obviously his ability to to put that into such striking, stirring music was key. But I love that. And I love, it also contains what's probably is and will always be my all-time favorite Springsteen
I
song.
know it, but go for it. I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
Racing in the Street.
I knew it.
There you go.
That's mine too. So it's
Very good.
so when you go into, there's always, I always put these polls, or I used to, I should say, in one in the group, and it used to drive people crazy. It's one of those things that put people on the spot. And one of the questions is, Racing in the Street, Jungleland, which one of your favorite, or so picking the Darkness in the Edge of Town or Born to Run, which album? Whatever.
Yeah.
But you were very, very decisive. I give you, well done.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I kind of settled in. I mean, it's just those are the ones that, and it's not because like I would ever say yes, they are objectively the best. Because there's no such thing as objectivity, but it's just right. But it's just like because of who I was when I heard it, who I was, where I was, and what it meant to me when it came out, and that's what mattered. Ultimately, that's where the connection is.
Exactly.
Wow.
So
I always thought it was interesting. I think 3 or 4 years, Jim did a top 100 Bruce songs to do for like the first of the year, end of the year. And it was like Born to Run and Thunder Road traded places like each year. So one year it'd be Born to Run, it's like very hard to, it's almost like you have to take Born to Run out of the equation, and then everything else is, up for grabs.
That's a really crazy song. I mean, it's like the structure of it is like wild.
Right.
And that the center, the middle section, the bridge section, and the whole sort of, the musical digression and everything. It's like what's happening? Like, how does that? It's like, wait, what? Like what? Because it's like you just listen to it and it totally works, right? But then when you if you've ever tried to play it or ever tried to really wrap your mind around what those chords are and where they're going, it's like, how did you think of this? It's like that's not. It's like how did that even occur to you when you were 23?
Right.
It's like, okay, I guess that's the part of somebody that that's like, okay, I guess that's like the genius part.
Peter, I think it was you, and you touched on this, like in the section where you wrote about the listening party. First the reel-to-reel tape, and then the demo with poor Jimmy Iovine coming in, and what the fuck just happened? What did I do? What did I do wrong? What's going? My career is over. You talked about this, like Bruce had so much in his head, he thought he had to get it all on that one album, and John said to him, which kind of just finally settled it, was like, dude, you don't have to get everything on this record. There will be another. And once he said that, it was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I think to your point, like Born to Run is such an amalgamation of everything he was trying to do that's how it comes out as.
Yeah. So well, I mean, it's a good record. What can I say?
It's a great.
You might think so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you
Peter,
so much.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you for inviting me and having me here. It's always fun to talk to you guys.
Well, you go right in, and again, from the SpringNut point of perspective, I want to thank you for doing this for the group, and I know you've been going back and forth with Ryan for a bit to get this thing done, and we do appreciate your time. It's been a fantastic, insightful, and amazing couple hours. It went by way too fast, but we'd love to have you on again when you write your next book very shortly.
Terrific. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right, Peter. Thank you so much. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take it easy.
Hey, Howie and Stan, stay on for a minute.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop the for everybody watching at home on Facebook. Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you for sticking in. Seriously, I think the number has been solid for like 2 hours. Thank you at home.
Did you cut off?
Not yet. I was just thanking everybody for home. Thank you.
Okay.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Yeah, I've been in this position before.
Don't say anything bad.
Right.